So I've got the blue 86 Moto4 out today, the 200DX, and it's just running horribly. It starts and idles, and you ride for a while, and it'll stall out on deceleration. I have cleaned the carb. I have checked the plug. I've cleaned and oiled the air filter. And I've put a new fuel filter in. And it's getting fuel. And it's always a little bit of a pain to get at the carbs on these guys. But having cleaned the carb, I'm starting to wonder now if I put the float bowls in upside down, because it really seems like a fuel delivery issue. And it never had an issue before. It was running bad, but it was a kind of a gummed up carb. But now with as bad as it's running, it definitely seems like I goofed something up in there. So I'm gonna pull the carb off again today and see if I goofed anything in there. Did I put the bowl on upside down, or the floats on upside down? Alright, so I'm gonna have to go digging around to understand if I put the float bowl on upside down here. When it comes up parallel with the top of the bowl, you know, for shut off, I would think that is correct. Hard to see. What I've noticed here is the pin for the float needle still has like 1/10 of an inch of play, and it's all the way up. So I would shut off the fuel about there, which for either of those markings, neither, and when I say markings, that line and this line, there's parallel. Here is not. And I actually don't know what the spec is for where that's supposed to be, but I'm going to do a little reading. Alright, the jet is clean. I've blasted it out with air. I've cleaned the main jet. This is the correct way for the float bowl to go. Set this back to factory 1.5 out. It was actually 2 1/4 out, so that might have been too much there. Alright, back together, fuel's on. I can see the fuel pulling through back into the bowl. Nothing's cross-threaded on the throttle body. Everything's tight, so we don't have any air leaks. Battery's about dead now. Oh. 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 There goes the coffee. Boy, I just yard sailed that coffee. Wow. Doesn't look fouled at all. Check for spark. Plenty of spark. That's an NGK D7EA plug. Alright, airbox. That doesn't look bad. Let's try and fire it without the filter on the back. So I had to choke the heck out of it for that to happen. So that was interesting. It was running on choke, and it just whoomp, came down and died. And on 2/3 choke, dies right out. Get the air filter back on, control the air a little bit. Still on 2/3 choke. Started on 2/3 choke. Off choke, it came back down and died. It's on 1.5 turns out for the fuel air mixture screw. So that's at 2 full turns out on the fuel air mixture. You heard it idling high. And then I hit the gas a little bit, and a little bit of hesitation coming down, and then on the way down it just died right back out. I'm going to go back into 1.5. That's 3. I'm going to pull this needle real quick and see if it's at factory. Wouldn't you know? The needle isn't at factory. The needle has 5 clips on it, and factory would be in the middle, and this one's been moved down, so the needle doesn't sit as low. So because it doesn't sit as low, it's richened out. I'm going to move this back to factory and continue tuning after that. At least the metal's a little warm now, so it's not freezing on my fingers. Alright, so now the needle's back in the middle of the 5 settings. So that really should goof with my mixture when I go to start here. All the way in, half out, 1. Alright, now I'm back at factory again. I'm back at 1.5 out. Two out. Two and a half out. Oof. too. So I'm going to park this one for a bit. I have not figured out why it's having such a challenge running. It'll run for a little while fine, but you know, when I say a little while, after you've been on the throttle for 10 or 15 seconds riding around the lawn, it just starts burping, backfiring, and when you come off the throttle, it stalls and dies out. So where we are now, I have the throttle body, the needle is on the factory setting, the middle of the 5 settings that were on there. It was, or the clip, was up 1, which means the needle can sit, excuse me, the needle, or the clip was down 1, so the needle sits up higher, which richens everything. The fuel air mixture screw under here is back to factory at 1.5 turns out. However, back at factory setting, I still really struggle to start, and sometimes it'll start on choke, but when the choke comes off, it comes down, so it acts like, again, too lean, which was probably why I had moved that needle up, but it's just not working now. I did put a new fuel filter in. The flow is set correctly on here. There is fuel coming. The plug looks fine, maybe a little on the lean side, so another indicator there. I think I am going to replace that plug. I'll get one this week. And air, the boot, everything looks as it should. Tighten down, breather hoses as they should be. I don't find any air gaps, so I have not figured out what the problem is here. So I'm gonna have to do a little more reading and studying, but I'm gonna put this away like this, not gonna put it all back together, so I can get back at it easy next weekend and see. It ran so well until it sat for a while, and by sitting for a while we would start an idle but didn't pull it through the main jet, so it never came off the idle jet. And you know, it's probably 4 months or so of really not being ridden, and then we had this problem. Before, it was running like a champ. Alright, so today we're going to keep working on the 86 Moto4. It's been having some difficulties, I was showing before. Starts, idles fine, runs fine for about the first 60 seconds, and then we'll stall out on deceleration. You'll get some deceleration backfire. I think that I'm hearing the RPMs hang a little bit when you come off the throttle, so I think it's got a lean condition, but I'm not sure there isn't something more to it. The carb is at factory setting, so the needle is set in the middle E-clip position, but the fuel air mixture screw, I think I left it at 2 turns out, which on that carb, the fuel air mixture screw is on the fuel side, so when you turn it in or tighten it down, you're richening the mixture. So being out by 2 really leans it out. So again, I'm kind of thinking I have a lean condition there. And factory spec for this carb is anywhere from about a 1/2 turn to maybe 3/4 turn out, for as best I can determine. So I'm going to try and get it back to that, warm it up, see how it goes. I do have a new carb, I do have new plugs, and I have a spare motor, and I'm going to put that spare motor in here and see about opening it up, taking a look at the valves, kind of educate myself before seeing what it'll take to do a valve job, or at least a valve adjustment on the Moto4. See if there's any loss in compression there. So let's see how that goes today. I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the fuel air mixture screw up under here because it's impossible to get at with this adjuster, and see if I can dial it in a little more. Alright, so I just changed my mind. Instead of first going after the fuel air mixture, because I know I have an issue with the float bowls and I have a brand new carb, I'm just going to swap in new carb, comes with new gaskets, paper fuel filter. I got a nice stone filter on there, so I won't use that. Ring. You know, there's actually another jet in here, and some posts for the head. I wonder if this jet actually has a sizing number on it. It actually came with a spare 120 size main jet. And so this is an aftermarket Mikuni, not actually a Mikuni name brand. Let's take a look at this. So on the fuel side, not sure if it's going to mean anything, but from the factory, that looks like that fuel air screw is way down. Let's take a look at the factory setting for the needle and find out if this needle is even adjustable on this unit. So knockoff Chinese Mikuni style carb, you can't adjust the needle level. There's only one place for your E-clip, so you can't richen or lean out with the needle. I just dropped a little washer out of here. So there's going to be no adjustment there. Oh, I can't pick this thing up. Probably shouldn't be trying to scoop it up with the pointy end of the needle either. Alright, new plan. There we go. Get that washer back on there. Another thing I'll call out, this throttle body. Nice and smooth in here, and this is where the idle adjust spins in or out to adjust as it goes in how far down the throttle body sits for your idle. The original one there that's 30 years old, it's got a big dimple in there, so it can get kind of hung up when you're trying to adjust your idle RPM. Now this E-clip sets down in here, holds the needle down. I usually have to hit it with a, just press it here like you're seeing with a flat head. And then spin it because right now that E-clip's in the way for the cable that you hook through the bottom come through. So again, I reach down in here, spin that a little bit so now the throttle cable can go right through. And let's see, we're going to leave these pieces out. With any luck, I can use the cap off the factory one and not have to rethread all of this. Kind of nice here. Look at this guy. That nut there could take up slack in the cable if I have any. And then, let's see, what is, it's not a 12, it's not a 13. The choke cable input, same thing. I'm going to try and just reuse the one we have, because that's working fine. There goes a spring. I do have to get the actual choke itself to fall out. There we go. So it really sits together like that. Cable comes through the spring, compresses, hooks in there, and that is what does your choke mechanism. I'll keep that together over here. I've got to put the O-ring on. And because there's a main jet here in my hand, it came in the back, I really want to open up the bottom of this and understand, did it even come with a jet installed? I assume that it would. These look like they're just kind of bolt on. Pretty snug. Nice clean bowl. There is a jet on here. It's also a 120, so it came with two 120 main jets. Tip it over. You see where the float bowl is set. And, you know, I had been talking about, you know, it being parallel, the seam. That would be way too much fuel. That would overflow. And none of these are parallel with anything here that I can eyeball to measure. For example, it's not enough for me to do an adjustment to say that the bottom here parallel with the seam in the bowl. That's too high. There's actually nothing for me to align to. I suppose there's a little bit of a seam right up the middle here, and I could put a mark on that with a Sharpie. Nice new gasket. Alright, gonna put this back together and we're gonna swap it in. Although before I do swap this in, I really want to know what this fuel air mixture screw is set at from the factory so I can record that. Before I go too far here, I want to look at whether the aftermarket fuel air screw would fit in the OEM Mikuni carburetor here. So this one, I think I left this at 2 out, half in, 1 in, 1.5, yeah, 2. That's where I had this one set with the needle at stock, so I'm going to take this out. And see if this carb body has enough space for the aftermarket needle. There is a little spring down in there. I'll leave this spring off. Leaking a little fuel on my bench. So OEM, yeah, same. It won't fit in here either. So despite this one saying that it's for Yamaha, Yamaha Moto, probably not in that spec. Just not quite enough clearance between the bowl and the head, so you can grind down the ends of this. It's just aluminum, then it would work. But out of the box, this isn't going to work with any of the Moto4s. Alright, let's go see how she fires up and runs. I think we're about ready to start it and see what she can do. Dead battery. We have a few minutes for this fuel to evaporate before I try to make any more spark over here, because holy cow, that revs like heck. And this idle screw is probably going to fall out if I keep coming down. I'm actually going to recheck the pilot jet on the OEM carb. I cleaned this last weekend. Didn't solve my challenge. At 2 out seemed lean, so that seems a little bit much, so bringing this into 1 turn out on the fuel air mixture might be worthwhile. With the hanging RPM and stalling out coming off of the throttle back to idle, makes me want to have one last look at that idle jet before I go too far here. This might be full of fuel. Yep, there we go. You know, there's another option here too, in that I can take the jets out of the Chinese OEM and swap them in here and really use that carb as a rebuild. Oh, if it wasn't dirty yet. It looks clean. We're gonna do it. We're gonna pull parts off the Chinese one. Jets, etc. Oh, I'm pouring fuel everywhere again. Oops. Yeah, that's all the same. We're going to compare these two jets. OEM doesn't say what size main jet is at the top of the emulsifier tube. Alright. What we're going to do, we're going to swap the whole piece into the OEM housing. Comparing the two. The pilot jet on the OEM has fewer holes. The OEM has got 2 at each quarter, so 8 holes, so 4 sets of 2. The OEM has got 2, then 1, then 2, then 1. But it is labeled. It's a pilot jet of 22.5. The OEM says weird symbol 20. Going to compare the two float bowls. I guess there really isn't a good way to well, helps if I actually line them up similar here. Get my fingers off the bottom. There really isn't a great way to make that comparison. Seems to sit okay. Let's go find out if I've just destroyed things. Okay, here we go. Alright, well that didn't go anywhere near according to plan. So what I've ended up with is a larger pilot jet. I went from a 2.0 to a 2.25. The aftermarket Chinese carb that I bought, I couldn't get it dialed in. The throttle body in the aftermarket was actually physically longer than one in the OEM, and I couldn't get enough play in the throttle cable, 2 different throttle cables, an OEM and then an aftermarket, to let that throttle body seat all the way in the carb. So whenever I started, it was always revving. I ended up combining. I took that pilot jet out. I took the new emulsifier tube out of the Chinese OEM and a 120 main jet and put it in here. And then I went about tuning the fuel air mixture screw. I'm between 5 and 5.5 out right now, which is it seems way wild. The Chinese one came from the factory at 4.5 turns out. Typically I'd see somewhere around 2 turns, 1.5, and I believe on this one the spec is actually like 3/4 turn out, so way out. So what I ended up, oh, and also what was done is the needle, I raised the E-clip by 1, which drops the needle, which leans it out. So I've leaned it out by a clip, and then I've gone 5.5 turns out, roughly, which further leans it out, which makes me think that I have a, well, I guess at the main jet, I wouldn't say the main jet's too big, it's fine under throttle. It was just really struggling at idle. So everything I've done to lean that out makes me think that the Chinese OEM jet, the 225, is too rich a jet compared to the OEM one. But I'm going to put this together, ride around for a while, and if it's riding fine, I'm going to leave it. but I did not expect to have to get that far into all the shenanigans of it. I guess that's how it goes. All right, I want to do a little bit of a follow-up on the Moto4. I spent a long time working on the carb, all kinds of trouble, had that up. And actually, I found what the problem was after all this, and it was a simple fix. I would go out and I'd ride around for a while and everything would be running fine for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then all the symptoms would come back again. So, at the end of the day, I had a plug in the fuel line. And that's why it wasn't a complete plug, but eventually if I rode hard, it wasn't filling the bowl back up fast enough. Stalls itself out, you let it sit for 10 seconds and it starts right back up, idling fine, always idled fine, pulled enough fuel for idle. But if you rode it hard, you drained the fuel out and it couldn't fill itself back up. And how I finally figured that out today is riding around and I was glancing down and I could see the air pocket in here, but I could see this, the filter empty out. And I could ride it and I wasn't seeing it pulling fuel back. And I started to wonder. So I disassembled one more time, and this time I took brushes and pushed them through, and I took compressed air and I blew out the orifice with compressed air. And once I did that, it's really running like a champ now. Super smooth, really great. So for all that work, soaking it in Berryman's, cleaning, doing the jets, really got a great tune-up out of it. But I did miss on cleaning out the fuel delivery. I assumed soaking it in Berryman's and then shaking it in some water would do enough. It didn't do enough. So, finally figured it out. Yeah, glad I did that follow-up right there, because after all that work, none of it made it run as well as having restricted fuel made it run. However, having done all that and put in a one-step larger main jet and a one-step larger pilot jet, the thing just rips. It rides so smooth. The throttle response is really smooth. And I didn't have to change anything about the air filter. Now you saw I have a K&N on there that's been sprayed down with filter oil. But without modifying the airbox, that one size larger main jet and pilot jet works great now that I have fuel. So hope you learned something. I sure did. I'll pay attention to some of those details a little more next time. Until then, though, I'm going to keep on riding.